Okay, welcome back to another author interview at Crystal Lake. And today we are interviewing the two authors of Midnight Vintage. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So we'll start with you, Josh.
Yeah, I'm Josh Viola, so I'm the most important author in the book, co-author with Sean, and I own BitBot Media, which is a multimedia company, and I also own Hex Publishers. So I've been writing and publishing for quite a while now.
Okay, introduce yourself, Sean.
Yeah, I'm Sean Eads. I'm apparently ballast for this project. I don't really contribute much except for my looks, I suppose. But I'm originally from Kentucky. I've lived out here in Colorado for about 24, 25 years now, and I'm a librarian by trade.
Cool. So give everyone a quick overview of the book. What can we expect?
Sean, I'll let you take that.
Sure. Well, it's a collection of about 20 stories, generally in the vein of horror, but also dark fantasy and kind of dark science fiction that Josh and I have probably written over the last decade or so, mostly for various anthologies. It also includes 4 new stories. And I think the stories are just trying to give you every sort of flavor of sinister that you can imagine in every conceivable setting, ranging from gritty urban noir to chaos on far-flung space colonies.
Okay, so what were your inspirations for putting the collection together, and what are some of the inspirations for some of the stories?
Sean and I sort of have this. We both like really weird, high concept stories. We're pretty good friends. We love going to the movies together and just talking stories. So writing was sort of this like natural extension of that. And truthfully, we met because I was publishing a horror anthology, and Sean was recommended to me. I loved his story, and then we just hit it off. But we just have this like really similar sense of style, I suppose you could say, for the types of stories that we like. So we're just constantly throwing ideas back and forth. And we often get together, as often as we can, schedules permitting, because we only live like 20 minutes apart from each other. And we do these like midnight walks, late walks, and around the neighborhood, and we just talk story. So I would say a lot of our stories kind of originate from those walks, but it also, we'll have some ideas, and then we'll see some sort of anthology that's got a call for submissions for something, and we kind of go on these walks and tailor it, and that's where it starts for the most part.
I would say too, I mean, Josh and I are about 10 years apart in age, but we have similar backgrounds in that we were both raised in fairly evangelical environments, and we both kind of rebelled against that. But that sort of tension of religious sensibility, I think you'll find that in quite a few of our stories. Like, I mean, we both kind of grew up in the satanic panic of the 80s. I mean, me in the 70s and the 80s, Josh more 80s and 90s. But like, we have a story called The Devil's Reel that's very, in this collection, that's very much about that satanic panic environment and fear of embedded, encoded messages and things along those lines. And we have a story called BFG in this collection that goes much more into the science fiction action genre that involves a group of kind of breakaway apocalyptic Christians trying to. They believe that Jesus could come back in the form of an android that they built. So there are themes like that I think we both gravitate to. That it's by no means in every story, but you can find that in several of the stories.
Okay, so what are some of the stories that the readers can find in the collection? What kind of characters, what kind of plots, and things like that?
Boy, a little bit of everything, in my opinion. I mean, we have a couple of stories you'll find that are set in historical backdrops. Like, one is taking place in Vienna in the 1920s, another is taking place in New England in like the 1840s. We have some crime noir type stories involving like private detectives trying to solve old criminal cases, with there being kind of supernatural or science fiction twists, into the world stuff, or just a little bit of everything.
Yeah, we have some splatter punk in there too. I mean, that's actually one of my favorite stories. Is Notches, which is a very modern story that deals with a lot of events, that we deal with today, especially in American culture. Um, but I like to think of it honestly as like a truly like a mixtape of Josh and Sean stories. It's really quite a diverse selection of stories, in the sense of genre selection and mood and tone.
Yeah. Excellent 80s term too with the mixtape. So.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
But one thing that the thread that like connects them all is that they're all dark in some way, and there's definitely a lot of humor too. Was we have a dark sense of humor, so you know.
Okay, so how is it working as a collaborative pair of writers? I mean, do you work on the story solo or do you work on them together?
Well, Josh touched a little bit on, I mean, from the very beginning, we'll just kind of get together and take some really long walks. I mean, sometimes they'll go like 90 minutes, 2 hours, often at night, just kind of rambling along, and we'll be hashing out, brainstorming ideas and hashing out plot points and hashing out, kind of what a character might want, how would a character react in those kinds of situations. Um, and after that, as a general rule, I will write the first draft. Um, usually within, if it's a short story, within a week or so, and then I'll give it to him, and then he will provide feedback. And I mean, we complement each other pretty well. And then I'm not a very visual writer, or I wouldn't consider myself to be, whereas Josh has a background in like graphic arts and video game design and stuff like that. So I'm not very good at fleshing out the details of a background, for example. That's just not really what I'm thinking about. I'm more into the interior architecture of a character's thoughts, and so um, I think in that sense, that's probably where we play off, like where I have a weakness, he has a strength, that kind of deal.
Yeah, it's sort of Sean and I have done a number of things from not just short stories, but we've written a number of novels together. We've more recently we're scripting a lot of comics together, and even working in the video game narrative department on some projects. So we understand, I think, our, like Sean said, our strengths and weaknesses. And aside from that, like I feel oftentimes it'll be like, oh, Sean and I will have an idea, and we'll agree that I'll see a first draft from him, or we'll work together on a first draft, and then like the next day I've already got something in my inbox. So Sean works very fast, but is also like that's kind of our walks instill this like sense of passion, and he gets right to it. But I feel like the back and forth comes more into the logic of the narrative and the plot points, and then a lot of diction and dialogue is where the back and forth goes until we get it to flow just right.
Okay, so what is your favorite scene or favorite story in the collection?
Hmm. My own would be a story called Unix Code, and that is sci-fi horror absurdist comedy in a way. It borders on splatterpunk, but I mentioned that I'm a librarian by trade, and I gave that story its title, and that came in part because um, I remember this very well. Once a patron coming up to me with this book that had been ordered, and it was a book on like the history of castration and Unix. And another librarian had ordered it for him, but he was looking for information on Unix, the operating system, and the person had not done a very good job at pinning down what he wanted, and had made some assumptions. And so he was like, "What is this?" And so I just the story was written for an anthology called Crash Code. It was kind of not cyberpunk, but it was kind of a computer oriented thing, and I had Unix in my mind back from that, and so that still kind of tickles me.
Yeah, that is funny. Okay, so what about you, Josh? What's your favorite scene or story?
It's kind of a tie. I really like Notches. It's our most extreme story. It was in the DOA 3 anthology of extreme stories. I'm pretty fond of it, mostly because it is so splatter and so over the top, but it also has a very strong message. And I think we probably I feel like we really did a good job of not just adhering to the splatter, but actually giving it substance. So I'm pretty proud of that one. But I also really like mini carvings. I think that's like our uh, a Josh and Sean version of a Halloween story, which means it's not like your traditional Halloween tale. I guess that's the best way of putting it. Which was featured in what was that? Doorbells at Dusk.
Doorbells at Dusk, yeah, yeah. It's an anthology with like Josh Mallerman and a bunch of other people. It was good stuff.
Right. So what was the hardest scene or story for you guys to write?
For me, actually, it's Notches when you come up to it. Partly because it was the first for kind of foray into splatterpunk that I had ever done, and um, I mean, it involves, without going into the plot all that much, but I mean, there's a school shooting, there's cutting, there is female genital mutilation. The story could just be called Trigger Warning, the short story. I mean, it's like every conceivable, well, not every conceivable, but several, it's like, wow, these are very touchy subjects. But I mean, like what Josh said, because I agree with it too, is that it's not written gratuitous and it's not disrespectful to any of those things, but it's just like, wow, you're kind of merging all of these in with this social statement sort of story. And there were just elements of that I had to get develop comfort with that subgenre of horror in terms of splatterpunk. It was not what I typically write.
Okay, so what about you, Josh? What story did you have some difficulty with?
I can't really pin one down. I would say probably every story, because when I go in and do something, Sean just goes no. No, I'm kidding. But uh, no, I kind of like the challenge. I can't think of a specific one that stands out, but when there is a problem or something, that's where it gets fun, because then Sean and I get together and we have that kind of collaborative back and forth, and it's always fun to find solutions to those problems.
Mhm.
So that's the fun. I collaborate with a lot of people, and I enjoy collaborating with everyone. But Sean has been my go-to, collaborator for a while, because we do just have so much fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so how long have you guys been writing, and why did you decide to write in the horror genre?
For me, I probably started when I was 14. I mean, I'm 51 now. I think I had my first story sell when I was like in my mid 30s. So a nice 20-year apprenticeship, just, but I mean, I would never, again, if I never sold anything in my life, I would still be writing the same. I love writing and I love storytelling. Horror, I mean, why horror? I mean, I don't know if I don't know if decision really is the right word for it. It's like the genre you write in is almost like sexuality in a way. So it's like, oh, this is just me. Horror kind of fits my personality. And boy, you start thinking to yourself, we live in this cold, amoral universe where you're given consciousness just to appreciate the fact that you're going to die. Yeah. Horror is like the only sane genre that makes sense to me in many ways.
Yeah, for me, I mean, same thing as Sean. I think same thing as most writers, creatives, artists. I mean, I've been doing this for as long as I can remember. Specifically, grade school, writing short stories, mostly to sequels of my favorite movies that didn't, sequels that didn't exist. That was something I did a lot of growing up. But yeah, 2012 was when my debut novel was published, and I've kind of kept going ever since then. But exploring the different areas, and that's as an author, as an editor, uh, as a narrative director, for video games, for comics, for a lot of different things. And horror is just that. Like Sean said, it's just I'm a genre fiction guy, right? I like it all, but I like it. I like it dark, and horror is just good fun.
Okay, so what do you enjoy most about writing horror?
For me, I think, and this can lend itself to any of the subgenres or whatever. I love just playing with high concept ideas, and I think that's what genre fiction, and horror in particular, it's very open to that, and it's very fun to explore in that genre. So for me, it's just like how ludicrous and absurd can an idea can we come up with an idea and then find a way to make it work? And I think it's easier in horror probably than many of the others.
Yeah,
Hmm.
especially if you add comedy to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do a little mini series on my blog where I've dabbled with a time traveling carnivorous sheep. So you
Oh,
can pretty much do anything.
right. There you go.
So what about you, Sean? What do you enjoy most?
Um, I don't feel like a fraud when I'm writing horror, and I feel like a fraud if I'm when I'm writing science fiction. To be honest with you, probably because I'm the kid that got C's and D's in biology, chemistry, and physics in school. I just didn't care about science at all, and if I'm there are there are things where I get bogged down with the details of, like, for example, in science fiction or fantasy, where it's like, all right, I've got to figure out, all right, how does this world work? How does the technology work? And I've got to, it's like I want to get straight to the character. I'd rather write about character than I would about all the ancillary things. And I think horror as a genre is probably most focused on character. I mean, of all the genres, horror needs character for it to work. If you don't care about the character, if you're not afraid for the character, you can't be afraid for yourself as a reader. And that's probably what I appreciate most about horror. Horror in that sense just fits my own sensibilities better in terms of, like, what am I trying to do as a writer?
Yeah, I'd agree horror relies more on character than world building like fantasy and science fiction do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So, what's the hardest part of writing for you two?
Sean,
Uh,
I need to think about it.
well, I did mention earlier that there are particular weaknesses of mine which are going down to visualization. I never think more honestly care particularly what a character looks like. In my head, everything I have very much a Thornton Wilder Our Town sort of sensibility. And if you've read that play, or the stage background of that is everything is just taking place on a bare stage, and maybe the one prop is a chair or something like that. You're supposed to just imagine it. And I don't care what characters look like. I don't really care about what a background looks like. I really have to, usually by about the third or the fourth draft, remember it's like, oh, I really need to describe this room, or I need to, like, what is this character? Does they have blonde hair, red hair, whatever? So, but I mean, those sorts of things are important in storytelling. I will grant that. It's just not something that I tend to focus on. So in our collaborations, Josh is particularly helpful with that.
For me, I think I mean what I loathe the most is probably how I'm going to answer this, but it's the rewrites and revisions. Uh, that's not fun for me so much, and typically the stuff that I'm working on, it requires a lot of that. So that's probably the hardest for me to find the creative energy and set it aside for that. I'm always way more passionate right at the beginning, and then it's like,
What do you mean it requires a lot of rewrites? Are you suggesting my first drafts are terrible? I think not. What do you mean?
well, I'm thinking specifically about the project we're working on now, the two projects we're working on now that I have 64 drafts.
He said vaguely.
So,
Well, we'll get to that in the last question. So now we get to the controversial question everyone has trouble with: is who are some of your favorite authors?
Oh, I'm a total snob. Ray Bradbury. I love Faulkner. I love Hemingway. I love Herman Melville, Cormac McCarthy. I grew up really in. I mean, I as a teen, I loved Stephen King. I loved Dinar Koontz, like Robert McCammon, Graham Masterton, those sorts of people. But in time, as I went on, I started gravitating more towards literary fiction, typically.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on Ray Bradbury is one of my favorites too. Sorry for
oh, yeah.
interrupting, Josh.
Oh, no,
Okay, so who are your favorite authors, Josh?
I'm on a very different spectrum here than Sean. I'm more of the cliche modern. For horror in particular, it's Stephen King. I like Joe Hill, Clive Barker.
A lot of Daniel Still. I think do you read a lot of Daniel Still? I think you do.
I lost my train of thought there, Sean. Thanks. Stephen Graham Jones, who's also a good friend of mine. Actually, quite a number of my writer friends. I'm pretty big fans of Carter Wilson. And both we specifically asked Carter and Stephen to provide forward and afterward for this for a reason, and they did. So yeah, and I like guilty pleasure reading, like Joseph Delaney. I'm actually quite fond of his work. So
it's curious that neither one of us mentioned each other. We were not each other's favorite authors.
I really thought about saying Sean, but I also didn't want to.
I thought about saying Sean too. I'm like Prince. I only read my own work.
I just didn't want to be a liar.
So. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so tell us about some of the other books you've written.
Go ahead, Sean.
Actually, Josh and I, before we knew each other, our first novels came out the same year, I believe, which is 2012. My first book was called The Survivors, and it was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award. It was kind of a comedy, dark science fiction novel about an alien invasion, where I was trying to imagine a character kind of like David Sedaris as like a war correspondent in the War of the Worlds, to give you an idea about what's going on there. My third novel, Lord Byron's Prophecy, is more like literary fantasy or historical fantasy, and it was a finalist for the Shirley Jackson Award. It was in 1816, in the same summer, the same month, when Lord Byron and Mary Shelley and their circle were hanging out, and Mary Shelley got the idea to write Frankenstein. Byron writes a very interesting poem called Darkness, which is really one of the first sort of eco-science fiction works, I think. The whole point of the poem is that the sun just suddenly goes out. It extinguishes, and then what do people do to survive? In the novel, Byron believes that the vision that he's gotten, that he's captured in this poem, is kind of a prophecy. He thinks it's going to happen, and he's kind of going nuts about it. And meanwhile, in the present day, a father and son character are also starting to have those same visions, and they're trying to figure out, well, what does this mean? Is this a product of various sorts of guilt that we have over something, or is this about to happen? My latest novel, Confessions, is set in a small Kentucky town, kind of like where I'm from, and it's more just literary fiction that's involving really about a day in the life of these three characters in this small town. So there's nothing. It's not genre at all. It's just it's more sort of slice of life story.
Hmm, interesting. So, what about you, Josh? What other books have you written?
My debut novel, The Bane of Yodo, that came out in 2012, and that I like to. That's a genre mashup. That's sort of science fantasy with horror vibes. And then I have the Denver Moon trilogy that I wrote with Warren Hammond. Um, and then Stephen Graham Jones and I have our True Believers comic book series. I just finished a novel with Carter Wilson that we're shopping around right now. And then uh, Angie Hodap and I wrote the Dead Shall Rise Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver graphic novel that blew up on Kickstarter. Did really well, and that's been a lot of fun. So yeah, so it's a mixture of novels, comic books, uh, and things of that nature.
Okay. So, what's your next project? You got any teasers for us?
Uh, well, I have a solo novel that will come out later this year, and that's called Lost Story, and that's about it's historical literary fiction about Ernest Hemingway. Yeah, I mentioned I really like Hemingway, but there's a really famous incident in Hemingway's life where he was up in Switzerland covering a peace conference for a newspaper. This is about 1923, so that's before he's actually published anything. And he sent for his wife, to come join him. He was kind of lonely, and she does come to join him, and she packs all of his works in progress, all these manuscripts. She puts them into a little suitcase, and she carries them with her, thinking he might want to work on them in his downtime. And really famously, she sets the suitcase down at the train station in Paris and goes to get some water. And when she comes back, the suitcase has been stolen. All those stories were lost. All of Hemingway's work from that time period, was lost and never found. So, Lost Story envisions Hemingway's attempt to rewrite one particular story that was never finished in the first place. It was like kind of like his first real story, and he's having trouble doing it. And meanwhile, while that's going on, it traces what happened to the actual stolen manuscript and the way it people run across it and come across it and the way it influences their lives for good or bad.
Hmm, that sounds very cool. And also, probably every author watching this and hearing that story probably got a chill up their spine.
We've
Because
all
nobody,
lost we've all lost stories. I've
yeah,
lost most of my stories due to hard drive crashes these days and not
yeah,
having sufficient backup. But you know,
yeah. My computer crashed end of 2022, and yeah, I lost everything. Luckily, it was mostly backed up. Just a few recent edits hadn't been backed up. So yeah, but it's a scary thing.
yeah.
Well,
Okay, so what about
that
you, Josh? Anything new coming up?
yeah, yeah. To follow up on that, my company Hex is publishing Sean's book later this year, um, uh, unless we end up losing the manuscript. But uh, yeah, right now I actually have
Plenty of backups, so it's cool.
yeah, okay. I have a solo comic book that's currently up for pre-order, which is tied into the new Soul Reaver remasters that are out right now on all major consoles. So I was hired by Limited Run Games to write a tie-in comic book, and you can pre-order that through Limited Run Games. And it focuses, if you're familiar with the Soul Reaver lore, it focuses on one of Raziel's brothers, and dives into his past and kind of leads up to the events of the video game. So yeah, that's available for pre-order through Limited Run Games until I want to say February 9th. And Sean actually I hired to do some edits on the project, so we worked a little bit on that together. And I have quite a number of graphic novel and video game projects coming out soon that are linked to kind of franchise IP, and I don't think I can actually mention any of them. So that's about it.
Well, that's not about it because we also have a novel that we did together that's going
Of
to be
course,
coming out from Crystal Lake,
that's true.
called Servants of Stone. And we're both that's going to be really it's also historical horror fantasy
That
that's taking place in kind of around the Connecticut area around the 1830s, and gets really wild. Involves a witch, involves President Andrew Jackson, and all kinds of craziness. But
yeah, that's actually very very exciting for me because that was actually a solo novel I started way back in 2000 and God, I, I think it was before I met you, and it
yeah,
was something I was working on. And then as Sean and I's writing relationship, as it started to evolve a little bit more, I was like, I really want to explore this, and I sent it to Sean, really for like an editorial pass and notes. And then he came back with some really cool new ideas, and then we just kind of started it over with
mhm.
Sean's new direction. So that's been for me a really exciting project because I've worked on it for so long, and um, quite excited by it. And the cover art is just gonna be awesome. So
Yeah.
All right. Well, it sounds like there's a lot to look forward to in the coming months from you two, as well as Midnight Vintage. So I'd like to thank you for being a guest today. We're going to wrap the interview up here, and it was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thanks for having us.
having us.
Appreciate it.
And if you want to check out Midnight Vintage, the description is down below. I mean, sorry, the link is down below in the description. Okay, yeah, get it together. Uh, okay, and that's all for now. So bye.
Bye.
Thank you.